Welcome to summer worship in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte. Welcome. Really. Welcome. If you know in your heart of hearts that the way things are, and the things we've heard and experienced this very week are not in keeping with your truest values. If you know in the depth of your soul that we are all broken and in need, we are battered and wounded and in pain. If you know deep inside that we each need healing and we all need to be made whole. Welcome. Welcome. Here, the flickering spark of the divine glowing in each of us is greeted with a grand and inclusive namaste. The light of each joined to become the light of all. So especially after this past week, take a deep breath. Feel the love in this place. And as you rise to sing, greet someone near you with your own kind words of welcome.
light this chalice today as a symbol of what is possible as we connect deeply with ourselves and with each other with humility, openness, and love.
Our first reading is from Rick Hoyt. Go forth, because we are always going forth from somewhere, going from our homes, our childhoods, going from our cities and countries, going from innocence to experience to enlightenment, going into mystery and questions, going into the desert, getting to the other side. Go forth, leave behind the comfort and community of one place, head into the anxiety and loneliness of another. Carry with you the love and laughter of this place and let it light your way. Carry with you the wisdom you learned and the good memories. May they give you strength for your journey. And when you have been away long enough, far enough, done what you'd set out to do, been there so long, that place too starts to feel like home. Come back. Come back to the one, universal, everywhere and every when and every one inclusive home. This beloved community of all creation that you can never really leave. I invite us to remain seated for the singing of the next chorus.
This reading is by the Buddhist nun Pema Chodron. Life is a good teacher and a good friend. Things are always in transition, if we could only realize it. Nothing ever sums itself up in the way we like to dream about. The off-center, in-between state is an ideal situation, a situation in which we don't get caught and we can open our hearts and minds beyond limit. It's a very tender, non-aggressive, open-ended state of affairs. To stay with that shakiness, to stay with a broken heart, with a rumbling stomach, with the feeling of hopelessness and wanting to get revenge, this is the path of true awakening. Sticking with that uncertainty, getting the knack of relaxing in the midst of chaos, learning not to panic, this is the spiritual path.
Plant your axe. Plant your axe. My brother, my beloved 5 years younger brother Mark was screaming at me. He was standing at the top of a steep, ice-covered crag as I was careening down, sliding rapidly toward a precarious drop. It was August 1999, and we were on the second day of our expedition up Mount Shasta, a 14,179-foot volcanic mountain in California's Cascade Range. Mark, a very knowledgeable, experienced climber, had suggested we undertake this adventure together. So we had driven 4 hours north of the San Francisco Bay Area and found ourselves a couple of days later at a trailhead from which we were to climb over 7,000 feet to the summit. The first day was an enjoyable challenge, a long, steady, beautiful climb up past the tree line and across snow-streaked rocky outcroppings to a campsite where we rested, ate, and took in the moon's splendorous rise before retiring for a short night's sleep. Just 2 weeks before, I'd spent 5 long days in the fireside room of the Star King School for the Ministry in Berkeley. I was on summer study leave from my position as the minister of a self-proclaimed liberal, ecumenical Baptist congregation where I had served for the past 8 years. We were in the middle of a challenging building project on what would result in an AIA award-winning facility, the preparation, funding, and design of which had consumed me in recent years. I was depleted from the added demands of that massive project. And so, as had been my habit for several years, I'd gone to Berkeley to participate in the summer session of the Graduate Theological Union. I was particularly excited that summer to be in a class on religious humanism with Corin Arisian, longtime minister of one of Unitarian Universalism's flagship humanist congregations and leader in the ethical culture movement. I was hoping to recharge and renew in a place that had become familiar and cherished over many visits. But my fatigue that year had an even deeper source. A decade and a half after my ordination, a few miles from here at the Myers Park Baptist Church, I was struggling to sustain my spiritual footing in a religious tradition that felt increasingly problematic. I'd been raised attending Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening services in a stunning glass and wood octagonal chapel of a highly educated, well-to-do Baptist church. It was a wonderful place to grow up, a community that first inspired me to want to be a minister. After the ups and downs of a degree in philosophy and a series of seminary adventures, I was well into my professional career with connections and investments and a growing reputation at one of the most progressive Baptist congregations in the country. And yet, despite all of that, it no longer felt satisfying. The effort to sustain myself in that role proved harder and harder. The steep climb into that pulpit felt more and more challenging every week. I was increasingly out of sync in a tradition in which I had cut my religious teeth and through which I had evolved into the current standing I had as a minister of a congregation known in Houston and beyond for punching well above its weight. And those famous opening lines of Dante, midway through the journey of our life, I found myself in a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. It was how I felt when I walked into a religious humanism course that Monday morning. Rousing ourselves in the pre-dawn darkness, my brother Mark and I donned snowsuits and helmets, before carefully attaching spiky crampons to our boots. Handing me my ice axe, Mark offered a tutorial, explaining carefully what to do in case of a fall and slide, pointing out how to plant the axe to slow one's descent. Then we were off in the faint light, the snow-covered summit not yet visible. It would prove to be the most physically demanding undertaking I'd ever experienced, far more challenging than the marathon I'd completed earlier that same year. We were soon headed up sheer frozen gulches, slowly progressing step over sideways step, our crampons tenuously gripping the ice with each stride. We gasped for breath in the thin air of that elevation, pausing frequently to rest and quiet the quivering of our overtaxed legs. Mark patiently accommodated my far less adept approach, pointing out footholds, offering me a hand up when he could, carrying our small pack with water and snacks for both of us. After an intense, challenging week in Corin Arisian's religious humanism class, the outline of a path forward began to emerge. I could see then what I would need to do. I returned to Houston and began immediately talking with Bob Shibley and Mark Bellatini, two Unitarian Universalist ministers I knew and loved. Just 1 year later, we had completed and dedicated our new building. I had resigned my position, left my job and my home for the past decade, and much more momentously, left the religious tradition that had been mine for my whole life. With a dear friend alongside, I drove the long route from Houston to Berkeley, where I entered Star King in order to begin the long process of transferring my ordination to Unitarian Universalism. Re-entering seminary in a whole new tradition after 16 years as a minister was exhilarating. Oh, how I relished that opportunity to be back in school again, to have long days of classes and long nights of reading and writing, unbroken by any professional demands on my time. I welcomed the chance to delve deeper into topics of interest and to explore new areas of import to my new tradition. After years of leading and teaching, I committed completely to the role of student, letting others be the guide while I followed along. I wasn't in the spotlight. I didn't have to prove my competence. I could simply step back and enjoy the feeling of not being responsible to set the course and of not being the one from whom commitment was required. And to be honest, it was also more than a little annoying. After giving myself permission to take a break altogether, I started attending Sunday services at one of the many Unitarian Universalist congregations in the Bay Area. But they weren't very satisfying. I was often irritated. That easier emotion masking my grief at all I'd given up. There I was with considerably more experience than most of the ministers I was listening to, wondering if such a huge shift requiring me to start over might actually be a big mistake. Could I allow it to be okay to set my own expertise aside and lean into the role of learner? imagining that these future colleagues of mine just might know what they're doing. Would the odd unfamiliarity of it all ever become comfortable? Would this new tradition ever really offer me a spiritual home? Despite slowing his pace on my behalf, the gap nonetheless widened between Mark and me until I was looking up a considerable distance at his competent movement high above me on the ice. Struggling to catch up, I foolishly ignored his counsel. And in an effort to ascend more quickly, I turned face into that icy terrain, attempting to ascend straight up. In just a few steps, I lost my balance and I started sliding, careening back down the narrow gulch toward a steep drop-off. Plant your axe. Even in my terror, I heard him screaming from up above, plant your axe. Oh, right, my axe, the one I was holding in my right hand. In the flash of that fearful fall, I recalled his experienced lesson: angle it with both hands and thrust it into the ice to stop your fall. Heeding such as I could his shouted reminder, I finally came to rest, splayed out on the rugged ice. I remained in that prone position, my heart pounding in my throat. Then, slowly realizing that all my limbs were still functioning, and after allowing myself the luxury of a brief respite, I cautiously crept back up into my climbing crouch, mindful to ascend in the manner that Mark had instructed, and set out to regain the distance I'd lost in my fall. I'm relieved, pleased, inspired, heartened that slowly, over time, I found a home, a spiritual home in Unitarian Universalism. Here in our odd mix of so many varying religious paths, none of which is valued or acclaimed over any other, I have a deep, sustaining, challenging connection. A connection to something life-giving again. I found a way to continue my ministry, to continue trying to make a difference, a whole new way of doing what I love. I'm glad now that I had others to show me this way. Aware of just how uncomfortable it felt for me at times, I'm glad there were those willing to forge this path for me. Being a follower, a learner, a listener hasn't always been easy. But it has offered me this course toward new and challenging connections. In case you're wondering, we did make it. All the way to the bitterly cold, stunning summit of Mount Shasta. The wind howling in our ears as we hugged my brother, my guide, and me. We paused. We took in that amazing vista from that remarkable peak. And then, aware of the long, long path back down, enjoyed one last look, and set out. To my relief, my dear brother was still in the lead.
Good morning. My name is Judy Weingarten. I was born and raised in Flint, Michigan, decades before it was abandoned by General Motors and the water was poisoned by corrupt officials. Both of my parents were from the South and came to Michigan with thousands of other Southerners to find jobs in an auto industry after World War II. Until I was 5, we didn't go to church. I found out about Vacation Bible School and launched a campaign to go. My parents joined a Southern Baptist church in the snowy north, and our church family was warm and loving. Growing up, I began to question the conservative Southern Baptist doctrine I was taught. In elementary school, I asked our minister, "What about all the people who were born before Jesus? Are they in hell?" He had no answer. As a teenager, I felt trapped by the rules. No drinking, and of course, no kissing. It might lead to dancing. I was deeply concerned when I heard deacons and other members of our church make racist comments. I'm grateful I lived in a different world at my high school, which was ethnically diverse and honest about the struggles of living in a racist culture. When I was 18, I volunteered to be a summer missionary in Atlanta, Georgia. I was hosted by Oakhurst Baptist Church, which was established in 1913. The ministers at Oakhurst were 2 white men, a woman, and an African-American man who would be my boss. His name was Reverend John Cross. He was the minister of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, when 4 little girls were killed in a bombing during Sunday school. Reverend Cross picked me up at the airport in Atlanta. I learned months later that he thought I was going to be black. My job was to work in a boys and girls club where I was the only white person. I knew I didn't know anything that summer. I learned that this white girl can't dance. but I could hold my own in ping pong. I also learned what it was like to take our kids to an overcrowded public pool. It was so crowded that the lifeguards couldn't see the body of a small black boy on the bottom of the pool. We watched as the lifeguards frantically worked to bring him back to life. That night, I couldn't stop crying. I knew so little that I went back to work in urban Atlanta for 2 more summers while I was in college. Fast forward to Houston, Texas, where I met and fell in love with a man with a distinctly un-Southern Baptist name, Norden Weingarten. Norden's father's family were Orthodox Jews. Just as I love the beauty of the language of the King James Bible, I grew up with that. I love the ancient Hebrew prayers that we sometimes sing when we light Shabbat candles on Friday night. While I'm grateful for what I learned growing up as a Southern Baptist, I gave myself permission to take a 25-year break from organized religion. In the 90s, Norden and I had the opportunity to spend a week with the Buddhist monk and teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, where I learned the meaning of beginner's mind. When I am able, practicing mindfulness and staying in the present moment helps me to engage more deeply in life. We found that many Jewish people who subscribe to Buddhist thought are sometimes called Jewboos. In 2004, 3 separate friends told us we should try the UUCC. Jay Leach was the new and gifted minister, and this congregation, as I often tell visitors, is deeply compassionate and lion-hearted. Worship here is very important to me in this sanctuary. Here I am restored, comforted, and challenged. The words and music allow me to connect to deep truths within myself and in relationship to others. I'm happy to call this my church home. So I guess that makes me an SB, Southern Baptist, Jewboo UU. Welcome to today's service. We're honored to have guests here with us. Our members would like to greet you following the service. So that we might do so, if you are visiting, please raise your hand and keep it up. Members, please take note of guests who are seated near you. After the service, invite them to join you for coffee and conversation in Freeman Hall. Should it enhance your experience of future services, you can find both a large print order of service and a personal hearing assistance device. These are the hardest words of the whole service. A personal hearing assistance device on the table at the entrance to the sanctuary. If you'd like to learn more about us, please fill out a yellow card and place your completed card in an offering basket when they are passed later in the service. Members with a life event to share can do so on the reverse side of the card. You'll find them along with the offering envelopes on the clipboards at the end of the row. Please begin passing them down your row now. Some returning visitors may be interested in hearing about how to become a member. If so, talk with our membership coordinator, Kelly Green. Her contact information is on the back of your order. Again, welcome to each of you.
Thank you, Judy. It's a reminder to me And I hope to you that not all Baptist churches are the same. I don't know that experience, but I'm very glad to hear yours. One of the things that happened in the Baptist church where I grew up in is that certain Sundays were designated to be particularly welcoming to visitors. And there was a message that went to members urging them to invite people to that particular service with a little strategy called pack a pew. It was the notion that you would take responsibility for a whole row and invite your family and friends to come be a part of that service. Manny Allen got the message. Manny and Tawana welcome a large contingent of their family here for their annual family reunion. And what a delight it is to see that you've packed more than one pew. If you're here with Manny and Tawana's family, would you stand up so we can greet you? You're keeping very good company. Today offers a special opportunity for us to make connections with others in this congregation, members and today's guests. Join us for coffee and conversation immediately following the service in Freeman Hall, and then for sparking conversations at 11:30. It's a quick, fun way for you to connect and get to know many more people in this congregation. There are other opportunities to be engaged here. You'll find a few in your order and more on our website under publications, where you'll find Currents, our weekly electronic newsletter. Members, we urge you, please connect through our member Facebook page. We're now posting regular opportunities for us to join our voices with others in the larger community. And because of the immediacy of so many of those invitations, that's now our channel of communication. Today we hold with love and in our prayers the family of Thelma Reynolds, whose brother-in-law just died and who also just experienced a particularly traumatic suicide. We hold with love the daughter of Elsa Lafferty, now recovering from serious surgery this week. We hold with love and deep in our prayers on this day the UU congregation in Annapolis, Maryland, where one of the victims of this week's tragic press killing was a member. We hold in our prayers the activists, the agitators, the accomplices who are now actively, courageously working to undo the unjust order of things. We hold with love the families who are still separated, and the families who are now caged together, who have come seeking safety and opportunity. The candles burning before you today remind you that though the darkness is great, the light yet remains. Should you wish to add to it with your own single candle of hope, of remembrance, of concern, or of joy, you may do so, visitor or member, during the playing of the music when the offering baskets are passed later in this service. My friends, I encountered no better words, no more truthful words, no more encouraging words this week than these from a longtime hero in the freedom movement, the courageous John Lewis, who wrote this week, Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid, wrote John Lewis, who knows something about fear. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise. And never, ever be afraid, he wrote, to get in good trouble. Necessary trouble. Now is the time to resist, the time to get into, the time to cause trouble. We together are on a journey toward transformation. We must pilgrim this way with hope, the hope we draw from one another and from this, our spiritual community. Please enter into a time of meditation and aspiration. We're all hurting families. For all hurting families here in this congregation, all around our nation and throughout the world. For all places where there is sorrow, most especially the town of Annapolis, Maryland, even more particularly our sibling congregation there. For a nation newly awakened, newly woke, now in panic at what we are and what we are becoming. For it all, us all, we pray. We open our hearts. We open the tender, often guarded places of our souls, and we hear it wailing, wailing the whole world round. Together, today, we are bewildered and confused. Together today, we are afraid of what is, and we are more afraid still of what could be. Together today, we are reminded that life in these times is yet full of wonder. Together today, we fight back tears of grief. Tears of anger. Tears of rage. Alone by ourselves, we wrestle with despair, wondering if all is lost. Together, today, we drink deeply from the sustaining source of spiritual sustenance. Together, today, we look in the face of evil and we say no. No, we will not give up. No, we will not give in. May our defiant, resistant no's become again yes. Yes, I am open. Yes, I am willing. Yes, yes, yes.
Your generous gifts support this church community and the growing work we do in the world. We will now gratefully receive the offering. please join me in an affirmation of our faith, rising in body and or spirit. Challenged by
I never burned any bridges. I've never felt it necessary to deprecate my past. In fact, it hurts deeply, personally, every time I hear that tradition insulted, as if my own family is being insulted, because, in fact, they are. The people who loved me and nurtured me and challenged me, and whose lives continue to live in mine, in a tradition from which I continue to draw. This morning, early, when I'd finished preparing for this service, came to me. And I had to hear it, that old gospel song some of you may know. I'm coming up the rough side of the mountain. It's the way it feels these days. We pilgrim this way, following in the courageous path of those who will lead us if we will allow it to be so. Please be seated.